My name is Tom Cooney, and I am Professor of Entrepreneurship at TU Dublin. Welcome to our series of talks for people with disabilities who are interested in starting their own business. During this series, we will be talking to people with disabilities who have started their own business to discuss their entrepreneurial journeys. We hope that these talks will encourage you to think about starting your own business. Enjoy the conversations. Okay, with me today is Mark Pollock. Mark, delighted you could join us. We'll begin the conversation by asking you maybe to talk a little bit about your background and who you are and anything else you want to chat to us about in terms of where you've come from.
Well, I will start because we'll probably pick up on this later in the conversation. But I'll start with my why statement. That everything I do is about helping people build resilience and collaborate with others so they achieve more than they thought possible. And the reason that the way I got to that why statement, which involves resilience and collaboration and performance, is based on my own experiences. When I was 22, I lost my sight very suddenly and went on to become an adventure athlete, racing in deserts, mountains and oceans all over the world, and eventually did a 43-day expedition race to the South Pole. And just when I got back from the South Pole, feeling unstoppable, I fell out of a second-story window onto the concrete below and broke my back, leaving me with no feeling or movement from the waist down. So I'm paralysed as well. And I have continued with the expeditioning theme, and now I'm exploring the intersection where humans and technology collide to try and cure paralysis in our lifetime with lots and lots of other people. But when I roll all that up, I look at where am I at my best, and whenever it's to do with something around resilience, something around collaboration, something around performance. And I've got three sort of businesses. One is speaking to leaders all over the world about those topics. The second is about a running event called Run in the Dark that has 25,000 people doing 25 and 10k running events in 50 cities every November. And I have a charity to try and bring people together to cure paralysis.
Mark, people may not know that your background prior to going blind, you brought up in Northern Ireland and you were an international athlete as a rower. If I recall correctly, you competed in the Commonwealth Games.
Yes, and the timing, I suppose, is important. I had very short sight when I was born. I could walk and I could see, very short-sighted. I wasn't allowed to play contact sports in case I got a knock on the head and got a detached retina. So I ended up sailing and rowing, and I was better at rowing than I was at sailing. So I concentrated on the rowing, did okay as a junior, and then I came to university in Dublin, pretty much to row, certainly not to study. And we think it's important, socializing, building your network, doing a sport or an interest, and then studying. They say you can only do 2 out of the 3, so I mainly did the socializing and sport, and which I wouldn't change, but I did end up rowing through university and starting to break into the Irish team. So I rowed for Ireland when I was about 21, and then the following year I was carrying on and breaking onto the senior team, and it was at that stage that I went blind in that season when I was 22. So in fact, the Commonwealth Games came 4 years after I'd gone blind, and rowing was an ideal sport for a blind person because when I was in the boat I was going backwards anyway. So the logistics, what I was going to wear, those are the main challenges. And I suppose the other thing was my teammates accepting me that I was going to contribute fully to the team. A guy called Brendan Smith and I rode at the Commonwealth Games, and so my teammates and my coaches accepting me, but that came down to me putting in the hard yards and proving myself. So yeah, the Commonwealth Games came after the blindness, but as I say, rowing was ideal for me being blind.
You competed in double sculls, was it?
Well, no, I wasn't great on the Paul O'Donovan and Finn McCarthy, and then they're the heavyweight guys as well in the road round. So sculling is with 2 oars. Yeah. I was with 1 oar, so I was in a lightweight pair. So I was in the lightweight category. Okay. Not so lightweight now, but I also rode in 4s and 8s. But at the Commonwealth Games, it was the pair that was our primary boat. We came 4th, and we got the silver and bronze in the 8s and the Cox's 4.
Okay, so you won Commonwealth medals, right? But interestingly, that was after blindness, and therefore you were competing on you were there on merit.
Yeah. And in competitive sport, it has to be that way. And after that, after the rowing, I got into adventure racing, and it'll pick up on this point, but I did 6 marathons in a week in the Gobi Desert, kind of the following season after being the Commonwealth Games, really fit. 6 marathons in a week in the Commonwealth or in the Gobi Desert, carrying a pack and in the desert in northwest China. It was amazing. And then I went from the heat of the Gobi Desert to do a marathon at the North Pole. So I was going from the heat to the cold. And at the North Pole, there were maybe 14 competitors, and myself and my teammate John O'Regan joined 7th and 8th. John says he beat me, but there was a guy, Sir Ranulph Fiennes, who's the world's greatest living explorer. He's got a whole lifetime of accolades. But
this be the father of the actor Rafe and.
I think I don't know. I think they might be cousins or something. But he was.
They're related.
They're related. That he was. He's an all action sort of British adventurer type. Went to Eton, was in the SAS, and then does these incredible adventures. But we were lucky enough to be at the North Pole not long after he had a heart attack, and he was up there just sort of as his rehab. It was a really big deal for us at the time, so he beat us. He came 2nd, a guy who was 60 not long after a heart attack. And I was talking to him in the mess tent. There were just 2 tents and a central tent, and I was sort of raging that we came 7th and 8th, that we weren't competitive. And he said to me, look, there are some environments that you're going to compete, and there are going to be other environments where you're just going to complete the event. And the North Pole for a blind person, underfoot, not great. You really need to be able to see with the spikes of ice. And I took that in the way that it was meant. And there were some races, like the South Pole, which is a totally different environment, where I was able to compete. And there were other races like the Everest Marathon, where it was just about completing it. And I think that was really a message from one of the world's greatest living explorers, to really deal in facts. There's no point in me saying, well, I'm going to beat Sir Ranulph Fiennes at the North Pole when I can hardly walk outside. But whenever I've got skis on at the South Pole, and it was quite forgiving for a blind person, well, I was competing down there. And we did that over 43 days. So this balance of being honest with myself, that competition in some environments is on for me, in the rowing certainly, and completion and the experience was another and equally valid option as well. We can't be good at everything.
I've got a range of questions, but let me start with asking you then about the South Pole and about your trek there and why you did it and what you got from it.
Yeah. Well, the South Pole was the culmination of 10 years of rebuilding my confidence. When I went blind, I couldn't leave my bedroom, couldn't leave my house, and eventually I did leave my bedroom, I did leave my house. I got back into sport, went to the Commonwealth Games, did the Gobi Desert, did the North Pole Marathon, which was not an expedition, we were only there for a handful of days, and a few other races along the way, but the South Pole was 43 days, the real deal, racing against Norwegian Special Forces and ex-British Royal Marines and the double Olympic gold medal rower called James Cracknell. We had to raise close to €150,000 to do it. I had to tell loads of people that I was going to do it, so that the potential for personal reputational damage of not raising, not getting to the start line, never mind failing along the way and not getting to the finish line, was big, because I was telling loads of people, I had to tell loads of people I was doing it to raise the money, but then that highlighted the issue of potential failure. But in fact, it represented the 10 years of building up slowly. So by the time I was going to the South Pole, I knew that there was a risk of failure, but what I had experienced previously was that if there isn't a risk of failure, it's probably not worth doing. So I chose that race because it was a stretch for me, but it wasn't the same stretch as the day I went blind, or the week after, or the year after. I'd built up for 10 years, so I was ready for it, but I needed a bit of the possibility or the risk of failure for it to matter, and for me to go after the 150,000 and to do the training and to put myself with my teammates down there for 43 days. So the South Pole, sometimes whenever I think about it, it's just, I went blind and then I went to the South Pole, but it wasn't like that. There were 10 years of chipping away, and at the end of it, it did satisfy that rebuilding confidence, that sense that I could be a competitor again. I didn't have to sit on the sidelines, that the blindness wasn't going to define me. There was a way forward in the context of the very real challenges that come with having a disability and being blind.
And Mark, I think it's important that people are aware that, like, when you went blind, it wasn't like you said, okay, let's get on with life, and now I'm going to become an international athlete, rower, right? That there was a period of, if I recall correctly, about maybe 1 to 2 years where you really struggled at home, because I don't want people to kind of assume that everything was all right, okay, and that you just got on with it, right? There was a dark period. Do you want to talk about that for a moment?
Yeah, absolutely. You're absolutely right. You tend to, as time goes on, I find anyway, you forget about how cold it was at the South Pole. You forget about what it was like in those days and weeks and months after going blind. So the way I describe it, looking back now, is my identity was defined by the things that I was doing. I was in university, I was about to graduate, I was going to go and get a job in England, in London. I was rowing for the university, breaking into the senior Irish team. I was socialising. It was all going my way, and then in the space of 2 weeks I went blind, and I felt like my whole identity had been stripped away because I couldn't leave my house. I didn't think that blind people did any kind of job that I might like to do. Didn't think blind people set up their own businesses. I didn't think that I was going to be able to row again. I didn't think that I would have a girlfriend. I thought it was all over. And I spent a long time digesting it, going through all of the feelings that Elizabeth Kubler-Ross describes, the 5 stages of grief, denial, the anger, the bargaining that my sight would just come back, the self-pity, and eventually some kind of resolution, some kind of acceptance that this is the way it is, and I need to look forward, not backwards. And it took a long time, but I think the first 4 years I set about rebuilding my pre-blindness identity. As I was almost on autopilot, to getting the skills to use a talking computer so that I could get a job, getting a job and earning some money so I could be independent. Going back rowing was important, socializing and being out in the world as a blind person and having relationships, and getting back to who I was before I lost my sight. So I did get a job. I did go and study for a master's in business studies, and I did get back into rowing and went on. And the culmination, I remember in 2002 in the summer, I had my silver and bronze from the Commonwealth Games. The company I was working for had gone bust 6 months earlier, and I handed in my master's thesis. And it was actually at that point that I had to really think about what direction was I going to go in. And at the time, there was a book called The Elephant and the Flea by Charles Handy. It was a sort of, he's a British management thinker, and the elephant was the big organisation, so you can go and work for the big organisation, as he did. He worked in Shell. Or you can be a flea, jumping from elephant to elephant, packaging up and selling your skills to those elephants. And he left Shell and went and became a speaker and a writer and a researcher, and I was at this fork in the road where, was I going to go and try and do what I wanted to do 4 years earlier, which was working at an investment bank in London, an elephant, or was I going to look at the skills that I had, package them up, try and create some kind of a business, and be a flea jumping from elephant to elephant. And ultimately, I ended up being a flea, but it took 4 years. I was on autopilot. It was uncertain. I didn't know if being me again was possible, and it turned out it was.
And Mark, one of the outstanding things that you've talked about in the past that has always stayed with me is the notion of fact that you talk about. Okay, facts, action, team.
Mm-hmm.
At what stage did that kick in for you? And maybe you might explain what you mean by fat as well for people who wouldn't understand it.
Yeah, and it's evolved over the years, but I think the facts bit comes from very early on as a schoolboy rower with my coach, who was a pretty harsh character. If you came in and you said, "Oh, it was windy on our side of the river," he'd say, "Well, it doesn't matter, you still lost. Now what can we do so you don't lose next time?" So he was always just completely black and white, not to what should have happened or could have happened or what might happen. And it was about what can we do now. It was very much about what we hear people talking about. It was about being in the moment, being present, and dealing with what you can deal with, rejecting what you can't. And over the years, it started there. I learned about it through sport. I probably experienced it in the aftermath of blindness, and then when I broke my back, I'd sort of trained myself up. And when I broke my back, I was lying in hospital, and I wrote a blog saying, was the things that because I set up a speaking business, and I wrote in the blog, are the things that I used to speak about, am I going to use these to deal with this new challenge of adding paralysis to the blindness? Or were they just part of a story so I could earn some money, launch a business and go off and do adventure races around the world? And one of the fundamentals there is dealing in facts. So when I fell out the window, broke my back, lying in hospital, I of course for a moment asked, why me? And for a moment I thought, this is not fair. But there's no answer to that. There's no answer to the why me. And who is the arbiter of what fairness is? You know, it wasn't about being fair. I was paralysed, I was blind, that was the fact, and what I was staring into was, can I accept that? Can I accept that new starting point? I'm blind, I'm paralysed, but I can use my arms. I didn't get a brain injury, which was potentially on the cards. I do still have my education, my network. I still have a chance. So the facts for me, the starting point is, okay, there's some tough stuff, the good, the bad and the ugly. All of that is the starting point. So it's not to ignore the difficult stuff, but it's equally not to ignore the things that you do have going for you and the opportunities that are out there. That's the starting point, not to look too far back, not to look too far forward. And then the action part is looking at what you can control and rejecting what you can't, which is a kind of Stoic philosophy principle from 2,500 years ago that I've only learned in the last number of years. But dealing in facts, accepting what you can control and rejecting what you can't, getting on with it, taking some action is important. And then of course you never do anything on your own. So it's important, I go back to my college days, it's important to meet people, it's important to give a bit, it's important to build up your connections and your network, because nobody ever does anything on their own. The idea of an individual hero story is just not true. So facts, action, and the team, we need all of these things.
Yeah, because I often talk about golfers and Rory McIlroy being a good example of someone who came from close by to yourself. And golf is a terribly selfish individual sport, but at the same time they all have teams around them. They all have managers, they all have agents, they have physios and golf swing coaches, and so there's still a team, even though it's a highly individual sport.
And then if you flip it around, you know, the sports psychologists work it. So if you got Rory or any of the golfers as the person, the performer, Rory needs a team around him. But the sports psychologist person, his job doesn't exist without a network of Rorys. So the sports side, if you look at it from his perspective, his business requires lots and lots of Rorys and other people along the way. So we all need a team. You know, we're all part of teams, and we all need a team around us. And those teams can be paid formal members of employees in a company. The formal team, like I always say about the South Pole, it was me, Simon O'Donnell and Inga Solan. That was the formal team, but there were 500 people on our flag that represented moral support, financial support, training support, PR support. There's the informal team that are sometimes not in the office or not at the South Pole, but are very much part of it, and that number close to 500 for us.
And all of this is the same for entrepreneurs, because even though somebody might set up on their own and be solo self-employed, they still need others to help them. And they shouldn't be afraid of asking for help. And you know what I talk about is an informal team. You're going to have an accountant, you're going to have maybe legal advisor, you maybe have a business mentor, you've got the local enterprise office network. So there's so much support available, right, in terms of building a team around you to help you to succeed, even though you're solo self-employed. Tell me, we talked earlier about you as an international rower competing on merit as an equal. When you became an entrepreneur, you know, did you ever see yourself as an entrepreneur with a disability, or did you see yourself as an entrepreneur? You know,
Well, I nearly I went to interrupt you because I saw myself as an entrepreneur, But that's probably not. That's probably the trade. It's a yes and situation. I was looking at if I go back to the elephant and the flea, I was looking at going to work in an investment bank in London as a blind person, and the range of challenges just to navigate London, never mind do the extras that aren't in your job description, just to be out there socializing and going from this place to that place, and just what my friends were doing as junior investment bankers, working very long hours. That might have been another factor. But it felt to me, and maybe this is somewhat timid of me, but it felt to me like the blindness was going to be a disadvantage in that environment. Yet the environment that I was sort of comfortable in, sport, and the business that I was looking at setting up, speaking business, the blindness then became a core differentiator within the business. So I was an adventure athlete, but I was blind, and therefore I had some stories to tell that were different, that were necessarily different from the teammates that I had. So I was able to create a narrative around my own story, set against the backdrop of the North Pole, the South Pole, the Gobi Desert, the Everest Marathon, Dead Sea Ultra, Ironmans in Zurich, as a blind person. And those stories provided both insights and offered me the ability to be slightly different in the marketplace when I was selling my speaking business. So I would say initially, no, I didn't see myself as an entrepreneur with a disability or a disabled entrepreneur or whatever. Yet the very fundamentals of my business were built on the fact that I was blind doing these events. So I don't know, can you have it both ways?
But you use your disability as a positive differentiator rather than as a negative influence.
Yeah. Well, I don't think anyone's going to, So the speaking piece is quite simple, and probably fits right across all of the different types of businesses that people go into. But whenever I set up my speaking business, someone told me very early on, it doesn't matter about my story. It's that me speaking is not about me, and it only works if it's about the audience. Like a good book or a good film or a good speech or anything, we only really engage with it when as the audience think about ourselves. Of course, this interview will only work if it's not about me and you. It'll only work if people watching are thinking about, well, how does that apply to me? What about me? So yes, the speaking and whether I've got a disability or not, it's got to be about the audience, and my audience is literally an audience in front of me when I'm speaking. So I'm always sort of thinking about the market, the audience for my speaking. They will buy me if the stories are interesting enough and good enough and the insights are there. In my Run in the Dark event that we have is in 50 cities all around the world, 25,000 people. The people who sign up to do a 5 and 10K, they've got to have a good experience. They've got to be able to sign up on the website with not too much hassle. They've got to have different payment methods. They've got to enjoy the experience, and hopefully they'll come back the following year. But it's all about them. It's not about me. So going out in the world as an entrepreneur or an entrepreneur with a disability, nobody really cares, or they should. We should be so minimized in the situation because people are interested in the product or the service and they're buying that. They're not necessarily buying us, although it's they do say people buy people, don't they? But
actually interesting you say that, because I'm going to do a plug here for Run in the Dark, because I've done it and I'm doing it this year, and I did it remotely because it suits my schedule.
Yep.
And where I live, And what I found really interesting, come back to what you're saying about the added value and the personalized experience, was that when you log into the app, there was a message from you before, as I said off, encouraging me, and there was a message afterwards, saying, well done, delighted you completed your run. And even though I was on my own in the middle of County Loud doing the run, I felt part of something, and I felt appreciated, and I would encourage anyone to participate, even if you're doing it remotely, because you still feel part of the community, and you've managed to do that very well in the way that it's sold. So yeah, I take this opportunity to encourage people to participate.
Sell.
Do you think that, given our discussion, that people with disability do face additional distinctive challenges in setting up their own business, or should mindset be get on with it, and where's your thoughts on that?
It's being an entrepreneur it necessarily has challenges with or without disabilities, and there are additional challenges for people with disabilities, and the people with disabilities will know far better themselves what their particular challenges are than me listing off lots of them. But in my own experience, there have been difficulties on accessibility of materials. Just being able to get access to information has been a challenge. It's been improving over the last 20-25 years since I've been blind. Accessibility, now that I'm in the wheelchair, but those are the kind of challenges that everyone with a disability experiences on a day-to-day basis. So there's the chunk of stuff that's specific to the particular disability that people have, and then there are all of the other challenges that go along with setting up your own business. And in a sense, I think people with disabilities necessarily have an ability to be creative, to work around issues, that lends itself very nicely to the entrepreneurial journey. I think there are. I'm trying to go back to those early days after I went blind and remember what the concerns were. But I was concerned about being out in the world with a disability, going to the gym and asking for help, living on my own. So I think when I remember back to that time, and it's different for me now that I've been living with these things for so long, I think there's a big question around confidence, and confidence that what's his name, Ian Robertson, the neuroscience professor in Trinity, wrote a book called How Confidence Works, and he says there are two things with confidence in the opening chapter. He says you have to have an understanding of can do and can happen, right? So if you believe that you can do something, you're halfway there. But if you believe that in the world or the context, the investment bank in my case, from earlier on, if you don't believe that it can happen, well, there's a problem neurologically with confidence. So to be confident, you have to have a sense that you can do it, and you have to also have a sense that it can happen, that it is possible. And if you have these two things together, then you have confidence, and then the whole world opens up. So can do and can happen sort of leads into some of the work that you've been doing for all these years, Tom, trying to show people and give them the tools and the backup and the mentorship that they can do it, or indeed that it can happen. Examples, role models, other stories, seeing people with disabilities and hearing the stories of people with disabilities who are out doing something that you might like to do yourself. That I met a blind guy just before I set my speaking business up called Miles Hilton Barber. He was an adventure athlete with a speaking business, role model. I met him and I said, well, it all sounds impossible. He said, it's not impossible, I'm doing it, so why don't you do it? So I did. But this, I thought that was interesting with Ian Robinson. Do you believe that you can do it? And equally important, do you believe that it can happen? If you have those two things together, it works.
I was having this discussion recently with someone about achievement, and I was saying we really don't know what we're capable of, because we should keep pushing boundaries all the time, because even when we stretch it to what we think is the furthest, maybe there's even further we can go.
Yeah.
What supports do you think should be available for people with disability who want to start up their own business, or who are thinking, is there a need for tailored supports, for example?
Yeah, I think there absolutely is. I know some of the research has confirmed that there is. Just on your point, I mentioned earlier on that I didn't go from going blind, not leaving the house, and then signing up to go to the South Pole. It took 10 years to do that. And more recently, I've discovered that in order to perform and with confidence and so on, we need to do things that are a little bit more difficult than we're capable of, or that we're comfortable with. Say it's 4%, whatever that means in the lab. But if you're doing something that's a little bit more difficult than you're capable of, you'll be able to do it. And then you do another 4%, and then you do another 4%, and another 4%, and it compounds over time. So it looks like over 10 years you've done something which would have been impossible to you 10 years earlier on. If you do things that aren't that difficult, that are easy for you to do, you become bored. So there's this sort of sweet spot that you need to do something that's a little bit more difficult. So if you're thinking of starting your own business, and maybe you're in employment, or maybe you haven't been in employment for a long time, or maybe you're doing something for the first time with an acquired disability, if you just say, right, set up your own business, away you go, that to me is way over the 4% more difficult than us, all of us, are capable of. So how do we give people the supports, and how do we go out and find the supports to give ourselves a little bit of knowledge in all of the different areas that we need to do the operational part of the business, the finance stuff, the business plans, understanding about loans, the technical things, the sales, the communications, all the idea in the first place. So having that little bit of support, having the resources there, having the role models there, having someone to talk to, the mentorship there, helps, I think, in creating an environment that feels like it's just 4 or 5% more difficult than we're comfortable with. To be out there on our own is just overwhelming.
And also, I think, Mark, people have got to recognise that in pushing boundaries and pushing limits, that failure is part of the process. Like that, and that they should see it in that way, that like it's okay to fail, right? It's what do I learn from it and then kick on. Because in my view, you'll never achieve anything in life without failure. Like, it's part of the deal. And I think, unfortunately, people see failure as something personal, and therefore they stop. Whereas I just see it as part of the journey. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I've thought a lot about this, because rebuilding my identity after blindness, after the breaking my back, and now what I'm doing to try and cure paralysis in a lifetime, right? That with all the other people, that's never been done before. So it brings up the question of what do explorers do? And I see entrepreneurs as explorers. Well, they push the boundaries, they explore what's possible, they risk failure in pursuit of success. So I think you can only do that if you define yourself by your willingness to try. Because if you define yourself by your willingness to try, then the success or the failure is kind of the outcome of the endeavor. I'm loath to say effort, because effort sounds like this sort of online, the hustle of merchants. You just got to work 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, and do another job and something else on the side and something else on the other side. That leads to poor performance. But if you define yourself by your willingness to try, the success and failure looks after itself. And that's how I've made sense of the possibility of failure at all the adventure races, and the possibility of failure, saying that I'm endeavouring to cure paralysis within our lifetime, and that possibly not happening. The endeavour is there, the intent is there, and that's part of the process.
Final question: what advice would you have for people with disability who are considering self-employment as a potential career option?
I think it is. Look, I've done it, so there's a bias coming here, but I think it is liberating. It's not easy, but it certainly is liberating. What I would say is, I did some research a number of years ago. It was people who were working. It was in my kind of late 20s, and lots of people were moaning about what they were doing, just on a daily basis, and others were talking about what they loved doing. And I interviewed them all for a book. So I took the structure of my talk, and then I interviewed lots of people in and around the chapters, which is, you might say, actually as a proper researcher, that's validation of an idea, not real research. But
the book is making it happen.
Yeah. And what I discovered was that those people who changed direction they de-risked the whole thing. So they did courses, they did experiments, they did internships in a handful of cases, but small little experiments in what they were wanting to do. But it took about 18 months for people to, in most cases, leave a job and go off and start their own business, or indeed go into some other avenue. So I think, de-risking things, experimenting, doing courses, building your knowledge, thinking about it and giving yourself enough time to get the idea right, to change direction, to rule things out. It doesn't have to be a big, you don't wake up one day and have the old eureka moment. I think it necessarily takes some time getting things right and getting things wrong to get to the one that is worth really going for. So take time, talk to people, do courses, experiment.
And with that, we'll conclude. Mark, thank you so much for being with us, and I'm quite certain that people watching will have benefited greatly from the lessons learned through your experiences and what you share with us. So thank you so much.
Thank you.